All right, so it's middle ground. It's Carlos Curbelo. Carlos, thanks for doing this once again.
My pleasure. Good to be with you as always.
So here's a good one: guns. Right? We've talked about a number of different things. We've talked about climate. We've talked about immigration, and here come firearms. Right? So let's lay out how you see these issues as similar, distinct, and collaborative.
Yeah, well, you always want to talk about the easy issues, right?
Exactly.
So I think there are a couple parallels or connections between the gun issue and cannabis. So number one, it's like cannabis reform, one of the issues that cries out for bipartisanship, for collaboration across the partisan divide. It's really the only way we'll see progress. You have on guns, a lot of members of Congress who are dug in. Some people have publicly expressed a desire to confiscate or take away people's guns in clear violation of the Second Amendment. And then on the other extreme, you have people saying, well, there can be no additional limitation or regulation of guns and the acquisition of guns. And of course, that's, in my view, an unreasonable position as well. I think we can respect the Second Amendment, understand that it's in our Constitution and must be upheld, and at the same time pass laws and issue regulations that will keep people safe and that will keep guns out of the hands of those who would do harm to themselves or to others. So that's an obvious connection, right? The need for compromise, for collaboration, for a give and take process. The other one, I think, for people who are strict constructionists, meaning that they read the letter of the law in the Constitution, I think there's a lot of common ground with those who advocate for cannabis reform. So Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Second Amendment refers to arms and the right to bear arms. The 10th Amendment refers to states' rights. Any power that isn't granted to the federal government is automatically a state power, so state sovereignty. A lot of people in Congress today are advocating for the States Act, which is a bill that would defer to states on cannabis policy. So for those who are big fans of the Bill of Rights, and I think we should all be, there is certainly a commonality when it comes to how people look at the gun issue and how they look at the cannabis issue, or could look at the cannabis issue. The bottom line is that the Bill of Rights matters, and that the 10th Amendment gives states the rights to pass laws and regulate different industries and different products. And both guns and cannabis can be viewed through that prism of the Bill of Rights, and oftentimes are. So I think that's a way where we can kind of view both these issues from a similar perspective.
Absolutely. And, you can just see it as a personal liberty issue. I want my cannabis. I'm not bothering anybody with my cannabis. I want my gun. I'm not bothering anybody with my gun. If I use it for hunting and, actually eating the animal that I hunt or whatever. There is no question, though, that one of these things is more dangerous than the other. How do you square that circle, I guess?
Well, look, sure, guns are obviously lethal weapons, but the bottom line is that you can defer to states, but on both issues, there should be an overlay of federal regulation. And that's why I've always supported universal background checks. I think that if there's going to be a transfer of a lethal weapon from one person to another, the standard for that transfer should be the same across the board. So if you go to a gun shop and you try to buy a gun, your name is going to be run through the National Instant Background Check System, the NICS. If I meet up with you in a parking lot and sell you a gun, that doesn't happen. And I happen to know you, and I trust that you're not going to use that gun in a dangerous way, but I could also execute that same transaction with someone who I met over the internet or really don't even know, just agree to meet somewhere at a certain time for the purpose of selling this product. And you know what? Same thing kind of happens with cannabis. There's an illicit market out there. People don't know exactly what they're buying. These illicit products aren't subject to any safety regulations or any taxes, obviously. So here again, we find ourselves arguing or advocating for the same kinds of common sense solutions. Let's have high federal standards that aren't intrusive, that allow states to further regulate if they choose to. A lot of states have stricter gun laws than the federal government does. States could have the same kind of construct for cannabis policy. The federal government should have some basic standards to make sure that the products that are being sold, especially they're being sold across state lines, that those products are safe, that we know what's in them, that consumers have the information they need, especially a lot of consumers who are purchasing cannabis products for medicinal or medical purposes. They should definitely know what they're consuming. Well, same with guns. If we have the goal of making sure that people with mental disorders or people with criminal histories cannot purchase guns, well, that policy should be true across the board if it's going to work properly. So, look, common sense seems to bind a lot of these issues. It isn't the most common of the senses in Congress, but
right.
we should still try to pursue it.
Perfect. Wonderful. I'll just dovetail this with you. You mentioned, cross borders. Congressman McClintock supports legislation for concealed carry across state lines. And I said, well, have you thought about that for cannabis? And he was surprised.
Well, I will tell you, Tom McClintock is a strict constructionist, and sure. He sometimes takes unpopular positions based on his intellectual integrity. And if you do believe in concealed carry, across state lines, then obviously there are a lot of implications in terms of cannabis policy as well. And I wouldn't be shocked if Tom McClintock agreed with you, because that's who he is. And even though I think he personally doesn't care for cannabis or the cannabis industry, he respects people's rights to consume the product and the states' rights to regulate it as they see fit.
Yeah, and as we've discussed before, as long as the other person on the other side of the table is intellectually consistent, we can actually get somewhere in a conversation. It's when we flip-flop based on, party, well, it's this person that's enacting the policy, so now I'm against it. That's when we lose,
Right. This should never be personal. It should be honest and simple, and we can all respect each other's points of views, but you can't have one constitutional interpretation for guns and then one for cannabis. That's just inconsistent, and it makes it very hard to understand people. And if you can't understand how people think, it makes it very hard to work with them. So I think we're getting closer and closer to the point where people are opening their eyes to the reality of this issue and incorporating it into their broader concept or construct or view of how our country should function.
There we go. And if cannabis possibly could lead the way in terms of getting folks together to figure out other issues. I mean, come on. That's why you and I do this thing to begin with, isn't it?
Well, as I said, a lot of people use cannabis products as medicine, and medicine can help you get better. So
That's it.
maybe cannabis can be the medicine for our dysfunctional democracy.
Perfect. Carlos Curbelo, thank you so much as always. It's always good seeing you, my friend.
Thanks, Seth.